If you love God, it stands to reason that you'll love His Word, and that it becomes an active part of your thinking and ultimately your actions and way of life. So real-time, everyday kinds of interaction with the Word is crucial in prioritizing our own spiritual growth as well as the spiritual growth within our family. Now the question is, how are you doing? So the family is still important to God and is still a place where a lot can take place in forming spiritual growth. One of my favorite passages on this particular subject is what we've heard this morning already from Olivia. I'm glad that Pastor Mark set this passage in the series as a part of the bigger picture of what we're trying to accomplish over these weeks. When we think about and consider what it takes to prioritize spiritual growth in the family, this passage gives us a great framework as well as a variety of methods to help parents and families to saturate their home and their children with these important commandments and truths. So we've already read the passage this morning, and we're going to come back to it. So turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6 if you haven't already, and we're going to look at some of these verses. But I want us to understand the framework for these principles we will look at this morning comes out of a context that is really important for us to understand. In chapter 5 of Deuteronomy, Moses has summoned all of Israel and has just handed them the Ten Commandments. God has made it clear what it means to live a life that is by His design and for His purposes. Now, in case you think, oh, this is Old Testament, has no relevance for our day, I beg to differ with you. While the Ten Commandments are in the Old Testament, they have as much relevance for us today as they did when they were written. That is a discussion for another sermon, but please understand that God has made Himself clear throughout the Scriptures on matters of living righteously before Him and before a watching world. These principles here in these chapters are part of the Shema, the central focus of prayer for the Israelite nation, expressing their core belief in God, and give us some good foundations, I think, for the practical outworking of spiritual growth within the family. Now, for those of you who enjoy alliteration, I'm going to give you 4 E's this morning, okay? Hopefully this will be helpful in navigating and organizing these truths this morning, these thoughts. So these commandments were to be, in verse 6, experienced, first of all. Verse 7, expressed. Verse 8, exhibited. And then finally in verse 9, engraved. Well, let's take a look, first of all, at verse 6. Let's read that together again. It's a brief verse. Verse 6 of Deuteronomy 6 says this: "These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts." In order for truth to be on the hearts of our children, it must first be in the hearts of parents. Now, this has some applications. The truth has to be something that we experience daily in our lives if we expect to see it in our children and family structure. So not only do we need to be knowing the Word of God, which is very important, but we also must be applying what we know to our daily experiences. One commentator put it this way: God's words must be laid up on our heart that our thoughts may be daily conversant with them and employed about them, and thereby the whole soul may be brought to abide and act under the influence and impression of them. And notice that this aspect of daily meditation and knowing the Word follows the commandment of loving God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. So as we commit to hiding His Word in our hearts, we give evidence of the love of God and display the means by which we preserve and increase that love. If you love God, it stands to reason that you'll love His Word, and that it becomes an active part of your thinking and ultimately your actions and way of life. So real-time, everyday kinds of interaction with the Word is crucial in prioritizing our own spiritual growth as well as the spiritual growth within our family. Now the question is, How are you doing? Do you have some kind of plan that brings you into interaction with the truth of the Bible on a daily basis? As it is in any discipline of life, there's no substitute for regular and consistent kind of interaction in bringing you to a place of effectiveness in anything that we do in life. Now, if you struggle in this area, I plead with you to talk with one of us pastors or seek somebody out here that you trust and seek out the benefit of years of experience of walking with the Lord that God has provided for us right here in our church. So you see, these truths, first of all, need to be experienced in our lives. And then secondly, in verse 7, they must be expressed. Let's look at verse 7. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. Charles Spurgeon once said this: however much we may love and appreciate the Sunday school system, and we cannot love it too much, I hope we shall never forget that the first duty towards the child belongs to the parent. Fathers and mothers are the most natural agents for God to use in the salvation of their children. If we love the Lord, we should do what we can to move and encourage the affections of our children towards Him. I love this concept of the affections. It's got a bit of confusing in our day and age and in our modern times, but it really comes out of Puritan thinking and Puritan writing early in our history. And it has some value for us today. For Puritans, affections were not simply emotions, but rather the seat of sincerity, the soul of everything that is good and praiseworthy. They believed that genuine spiritual experience involved strong, heartfelt devotion to God and His teachings, and that misplaced affections could hinder one's spiritual journey. It's not my purpose to unfold all the details of Puritan thinking this morning, but I think they have something for us here in this context. If you want to know more about Puritan thinking, I would recommend Jonathan Edwards or John Owen or even a contemporary writer, John Piper, on this subject. Very helpful thoughts in their readings and in their works. The implication here, though, is that as the Word is on our hearts, there is a welling that takes place of the affections in us to such a degree that we, by word and action, express the truth, and it spills over into our children and elicits a kind of response that reaches into the core of their souls and causes them to say, yes, that's what I need. That's what I want. Here is where what we heard last week really comes into play. Val was spot on in some of her insight as it relates to young people. Here are some of the words that she used last week. Students want to know not just what we know, but what we think and why. Not just information transfer, but walking with someone, discipling them. Questions crack open the heart and create powerful windows into the heart and the soul. Questions and answers are throughout the Gospels. Rather than being transactional, Christ was concerned about the heart. Things like, what is my only hope in life and death, ought to be asked. Not being afraid or ashamed of questioning. Taking them to Jesus. The trust relationship develops and deepens with good questioning. And the church ought to be the place where this can happen. Parents being sure to create the context in their home, modeling questions like, I had this question. Great suggestions to us and great principles for us to follow. Now, in this context here, there's another interesting aspect of these words. There's an interesting process alluded to here of whetting a knife blade. The words teach them diligently implies this concept. Now, whetting, you may be familiar with this, especially if you're a hunter, refers to the process of sharpening a blade, typically using a whetstone or a type of abrasive stone. The process takes when you wet a blade involves rubbing the edge of the blade against a whetstone. The goal in the process is to remove microscopic amounts of metal, creating a sharper, more defined edge. In other words, we can repeat this passage and say it this way: Thou shalt whet or teach them diligently to thy children. Frequently repeat these things to them. Try all ways of instilling them into their minds and making them pierce into their hearts, as in whetting a knife. It's turned first on one side, then on the other. Be careful and exacting in teaching thy children, and aim, as by whetting, to sharpen them and put an edge upon them. The term can also be used to excite or stimulate something, as in whetting the appetite. And we'll keep moving here because I know that's probably starting to happen, all right, as the morning goes on, right? You see, Dad and Mom, Grandpa, Grandma, and all who exercise any kind of influence in the lives of our children, education is not just about teaching facts and principles, not just passing along information. Teaching is experiencing the truth personally, then living out the truth before our children. It is applying the truth of the commandments to one's heart and experiencing the truth within one's own life. The children then see the truth of the commandments live before their very eyes, and they absorb the truth, pick it up automatically. The truth becomes a part of their lives. I want you to notice also here in this verse 4 postures or 4 positions. They were to talk about these commandments when they sit at home, when you walk along the way, when you lie down, and when you get up. It's more than just taught, it is caught. In the everyday challenges, the teachable moments, the quiet, profound moments, and in all experiences of life. I will not soon forget the advice that my mom gave to me almost every day when I walked out the door down towards the school bus stop. She would always say to me when I turned the corner on the driveway, she said, "Paul, remember, the Lord is with you today." Now, all you parents know that had a twofold purpose, right? You already know. One was a word of encouragement. Hang in there today, have a good day. The other was, behave yourself. I remember sharing that with my mom later in our life. She goes, "Paul, I can't believe I did that every day." I said, "You did, Mom, almost every day." And I said, "Thank you for doing it, because it means more to me now than it ever did then." But I'm so grateful for that kind of advice. When you're walking along the way, when you're sitting at home, when you're lying down, when you're waking up, that's where all these things need to take place. Another commentator has said it this way: we are to talk about God's will for our lives during the entire scope of our daily activities. It is the responsibility of parents to pass on lifestyle faith. So not only is this to be experienced, it's to be expressed, but in verse 8, it's to be exhibited. Let's read that there, verse 8. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. At the time that the commandments were given, there were very few written copies of the whole law, only bits and pieces, and only at the Feast of Tabernacles the people had it read to them. And so God appointed them, at least for the present time there, to write some select sentences of the law that were the most weighty and comprehensive. And they were to do this upon their walls, or in scrolls, or in parchment that was to be worn on their wrists. This was a very popular sight in that time, and it was very common. These were called phylacteries, or frontlets, which were a band, a sign, or a mark that was placed on the forehead between the eyes. Here the phylacteries were to serve as reminders of the Lord's commands. The instruction was to bind the phylactery between one's eyes and bind the Lord's commandment on one's hand as a symbol of the law's involvement in everyday life. in the life of a Hebrew, including his actions binding on the hands and his thoughts binding on the head. Now, what are the implications of that for us today? I'm not advocating the wearing of phylacteries today, but this concept does have some practical applications for us in the day in which we live. The Bible, for us, is clear to us about what we ought to be doing with its principles. Psalm 119:11 says, "I have hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against you." Wow, that's important. Psalm 1, verses 1 and 2 says, "Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sits in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on his law day and night." Proverbs 4, 20 and 22, "My son, pay attention to what I say. Turn your ear to my words. Do not let them out of your sight. Keep them within your heart, for they are life to those who find them and health to one's whole body." And then finally, Colossians chapter 3 and verse 16 in the New Testament, "Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another with wisdom, with all wisdom, through psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your hearts." So many of us have numerous copies of the Bible at our disposal. How are we exhibiting its importance in our homes and families? What symbols do we have, even in our homes, to help remind us of the importance of truth? Now, I realize symbols can become idols if we're not careful, so there needs to be balance here. It's interesting that another aspect of the wearing of these implements in the body for the earliest Jewish people was to display the unashamed allegiance that they had to their beliefs and to their God. While we need to be cautious and wise about what we display, I wonder, is there room in our houses for something like this today? So these truths, these commandments need to be experienced in our lives. They need to be expressed, and they need to be exhibited. And then finally in verse 9, they need to be engraved. Let's read that there. Verse 9 of chapter 6, "Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates." This again is a symbolic gesture that God is to have a part not only in our home life, but also in our social life. The threshold of the Jewish home represented the presence of God. You remember in Exodus chapter 12, they were to put the blood on the lintel there over the doorposts in Exodus chapter 12. The gates referred to here may refer to a place of social meeting and justice, like the city gates. Usually there were small boxes at the doorway that were markers. They were called mezuzah. And they contain several set passages of Scripture. Deuteronomy 6, chapter 11, Exodus 13, and other ones as well. Another commentator in mentioning this says this about engraving. "Write has the sense of engrave. The image is that of an engraver of a monument who takes hammer and chisel in hand and with painstaking care etches a text into the face of the solid slab of granite. The sheer labor of such a task is daunting indeed, but once done, the message is there to stay." So how are you doing that in your home? How are you engraving the truth of God in your own heart, in your own life, and in the lives of your children and family? So we have 4 principles here. These truths, these principles need to be experienced. They need to be expressed. They need to be exhibited in our lives daily, and they need to be engraved in our lives. So how do we take those and make some practical application to the things that we've considered here this morning? And I want to give you 4 challenges as we finish up this morning that I hope you'll take away with you as you think about these principles. Here's the first one. Number 1, make a commitment. Parents must view themselves as disciple makers rather than mere caregivers. This shift in mindset enables them to guide their children on their path of faith. So we need to make the commitment, and we need to continue to make the commitment to this. Number 2, know your beliefs. Parents need to deeply understand their Christian faith, their Christian belief, their origins, their significance, and why they believe them. Then they can initiate an ongoing journey of faith exploration together by sharing and modeling these principles as they align with their beliefs. So make a commitment. Know your beliefs. Number 3, convert beliefs into action. Simply believing in Christian values is not enough. Action is required. Children learn by example and need to see their parents living out their faith through consistent actions aligned with their beliefs. Now, we had a very, very neat moment last night, my wife and I, as we were getting ready to go to sleep for the evening. I'm usually starting to conk out, and my wife is watching some things on her phone, and all of a sudden on the phone comes our daughter, our youngest daughter, and her daughter, our youngest granddaughter, singing together. It is well with my soul. It's my daughter's favorite hymn. But what a special moment it was for us to listen to our daughter passing on eternal truth through a song to our granddaughter and to her child. That's what it's about. Very special. It was really interesting to listen. Diane said at one point, I think Shiloh's tired, because you can kind of feel and hear the voice going off, and then she'd come back, But it was just a very special moment, and we were very grateful that God has given our daughter and our daughters that challenge and that ability to be able to do those things. So it was a special moment. Converting beliefs into action, instilling this in her mind and heart. And then finally, number 4, measure progress. Regularly evaluating the effectiveness of their parenting efforts, of our parenting efforts, is crucial. Parents should both assess their personal faith journey and their children's spiritual growth, making adjustments where necessary and seeking support as needed. So make the commitment, know your beliefs, convert those beliefs into action, and then measure that progress regularly. Such an important thing.